Today on episode 14 of the Basement Brewed Fantasy Football Podcast, we have very special guest Dougley Durong, the Miami Dolphins expert, analyst, insider, specialist. He has over 34,000 subscribers on YouTube, and today he came on the show to talk all things fantasy football from a Miami Dolphins standpoint. We talked offensive line. We talked the defensive side of the ball. We talked IDP players, Tua Tagovailoa, Chase Edmonds, Sony Michel, Raheem Mostert, Tyreek Hill, Mike Gesicki, Jaylen, Waddle. And by the end of the conversation, his insights even led to me moving one specific running back up a couple tiers in my fantasy football draft kits. All of that and more starts right now. What is up, my friend? Welcome to the basement. I am Mikey Henninger, and this is Basement Brewed Fantasy Football. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in to what I think is the best fantasy football show on this side of Franklin, Wisconsin. I honestly don't think it's particularly close, but I might be biased there. This is episode 14, and today we are going to continue my summer series where I'm covering all 32 NFL teams from a fantasy football standpoint, and we're going back to the Miami Dolphins. I wanted to bring in a very, very special guest here. If you've missed any of the recent previews, by the way, I will drop a link to the articles, the podcast episodes, the YouTube episodes. Everything's going to be in the description of this episode, so you can go back and look. But back on episode 3, we talked Miami Dolphins, which I think is one of the most fascinating teams in fantasy football this year. I covered them, I think, relatively thoroughly from a numbers perspective, but of course, I wanted to get the analysis. I wanted to get the insight from a specialist, an expert, an insider. So I went to Reddit and I asked, hey guys, I went to Dolphins Reddit, which can be a scary place. Anywhere on Reddit can be a scary place. And I asked, hey guys, I'm not a Dolphins fan, Packer fan here, but who do I need to ask? Who do I need to approach with a collaboration idea? Who is the best Dolphins podcast and Dolphins YouTube show that's out there? And Doug from Dougley Durong was mentioned first and foremost, like among over everybody else. So I present you all with Doug from Dougley Durong. He has over 34,000 subscribers on YouTube. Please give him a follow at Dougley, which is Doug Lie Durong, at Dougley Durong. What's up, Doug? Thanks for being here, man. How you feeling about the Fins headed into 2022?
I was feeling good until today, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, I wasn't going to bring it up too soon, but you certainly did. Let's talk about it real quick. So I think we talked a little bit before the show. You know, my audience is typically fantasy football players. They're not quite as dialed into the Dolphins as you are, although nobody in the world is probably dialed into the Dolphins as much as you are. But talk to us a little bit. I think everybody might have a hangover from the Deshaun Watson news. Talk to us a little bit about what in the world happened today and where did it come from and what does it mean?
So essentially, the Miami Dolphins lost their first round pick next year and their third round pick the year after. So next year, they still have a first. It's just the 49ers first. So Dolphins fans are going to be rooting hard for the 49ers to fall on their face. Because they were tampering with trying to bring Tom Brady to Miami 3 separate times in 2019, before 2020, and 21, and after 2021 season. So multiple times they tried to bring Tom Brady in, and then also they were in contacts with Sean Payton's agent when they shouldn't have been, because they didn't have permission from the Saints to try to bring him in as a head coach before Mike McDaniel came in. So they were found guilty on that. So they, the owner cannot be a part of the team until October, 6 games, which I find it very interesting that him and Deshaun Watson get the same punishment.
Yep.
But
that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, we won't talk about that. And the I guess the interim or the owner that was going to take over after Stephen Ross left, which I don't want him to. Beal is his last name.
Sure.
He's suspended for the year. And then like $1 million fine. And yeah, it was a good day, but they weren't found for tanking.
Okay. So
because that was the one thing that Brian Flores came out and said, oh, Stephen Ross was going to pay me $1,000 a game to lose. And They were not guilty of that. The judge said
that was going to be my follow-up question, because I know, everybody's aware that there's been quite a bit of Brian Flores.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say in the news, but in the past news, there's been quite a bit there. So thanks for clearing that up. I think that, that's definitely brutal as a Dolphins fan to lose that first pick. It's good. Obviously good to hear you still have the 49ers first pick, but thanks for clearing that up for all of us who aren't quite as tuned in as you might be. I appreciate that.
No problem at all.
So before we jump into the fantasy football side here, Doug, I wanted to ask you, right? When I reached out to you on Twitter, I remember saying to you, like, do I call you Dougley? Like, how did the Dougley do wrong thing come to be? Like, where did that name come from?
So a while ago when I was in college, which wasn't that long ago. I don't want to think about how long. I graduated in 2015, even though I graduated high school in 2005. I was in college for a long time.
Me too. 2006 to 2012. I'm with you.
Yeah, I changed my majors a lot. You know how college life is.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend wanted to call me ugly because, that's how guys are.
That sounds like a really good friend. I can tell you guys are already close for sure.
Yeah. So he wanted to call me ugly, but he called me, my name's Doug. So he called me Dougley.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at him like, what the hell? Are you an idiot? But I like stewed on it for a minute while we were still hanging out. And I was like, Dougley. And I'm like, it kind of sounds like Dudley. And then I thought of the cartoon Dudley Do Right. And I was like, let me flip it, because Dougley sounds like, you're ugly. So it kind of sounds the opposite. So Dougley Do Wrong.
Sure.
Came out of it. And I've had my YouTube channel, I think, since 2006.
Oh, okay.
I've been doing YouTube for a minute. Again, I graduated a degree in media.
Sure.
So I know how to shoot, edit, audio, all that stuff. So that's where the name came from.
Okay. And I'm gonna be in your DMs quite frequently when I need help because editing and shooting, that is not my jam. So it's good. It's good to know.
I have like a little mini series going on my Patreon if anyone wants to join it.
Love it. There you go. Everybody check out Doug's Patreon amongst everything else. And then New Jersey. I know you're in New Jersey, but a Dolphins fan, and you're from New Jersey. How in the world did that all come to be? Because if anything, I would think Giants, Jets, you're even in Patriot territory, kind of. Like, where? How did the Dolphins come out?
It's funny because you were talking about, you watched my video today, and I got a bunch of flack that they're like, you shouldn't be covering the Dolphins. You're not in Miami. And I'm like, what sense does that make?
This is the internet age.
Yeah, there's actually probably more Dolphin fans out of Miami than there are in Miami.
Right.
So my dad is a huge Dolphins fan. He was born in 65. So he grew up 72, 73, 74,
right.
The greatest decade of, 70s, 80s, 90s to mid 90s, Don Shula. My dad grew up with that. And funny, the last 20 years, the Dolphins are kind of just mediocre.
Right.
No one really talks about them. But from the 70s to 2000s, the Dolphins were popular and they were really good. So there was Dolphin stuff everywhere. So my dad got like one of these books to anyone that's of my dad's age, around 55, 60. There was these books where they had like the football uniforms, and he had to pick one for Christmas, and he picked the Dolphins. And ever since then, he loved it. And he's born again, born and raised in New Jersey, just like his father. His father's a Cowboys Dolphins fan, old school,
Okay. All right.
Old teams. So I grew up watching him love the team. And then I also, was born in 87. I started following the football in 95, Dan Marino.
Yeah.
It just worked. Whereas the Jets sucked in the 90s. So
totally. Yep. And they still do.
Yeah, exactly. So
although the arrow's pointing up.
A Jersey guy became a diehard Dolphins fan. I actually have it tattooed.
Oh, yeah. I love it, man.
Right there.
Yeah, dude. That's awesome. That's a good story. And it's funny talking about, like, several decades ago, the Dolphins were really good, but they've been just kind of like meh in the last several years. It's being a 33-year-old Packers fan. It's the opposite. Like, my dad was a Packers fan, and he suffered through the 70, like they were bad for a long time. And then I was born and we had, decades of Brett Favre followed by Aaron Rodgers. So my generation of Packers, we're spoiled as can be. Like, when Rodgers hangs them up, we are probably like in all likelihood, we are probably in for some heartache for a decade or two. So
I had a friend who he's a Patriots fan, and when they went 11-5 and missed the playoffs, he was like, "Oh, what a bad year!" And I was like, "Shut up!" Like 11-5, and you're upset. Get out of my face.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's definitely us. Although, I mean, most Packer fans were also Milwaukee Brewers and Milwaukee Bucks fan, which we were used to them being bad our whole. So maybe we'll be used to it, but who knows? Anyway, Dolphins fantasy football. So you play fantasy football, yeah? How many leagues are you in? How long have you been at it?
I've been at it for a minute, for a while. A long time.
Sure.
Normally I try not to overdo it, because when you overdo it, then you forget to set your lineups and you forget about waivers. So I try to stick to a minimum of like 2 to 3 leagues. I try to run a league for my channel, and then run a league for my Patreons. And then just one for fun for me, so I can actually enjoy what I'm doing. So I try to stick to like 2 or 3 minimum. Yeah,
that's about spot on too, by the way. I ran a poll on Twitter asking how many leagues people are in. Most people said 2 to 3. Granted, somebody made a good point that I ran that poll in July, and most of those people are like dynasty people, like, you know what I mean? So, but anyway, so the Dolphins, from a fantasy football standpoint, I said this in my article, I said this on my podcast, my YouTube show. I think if you take all 32 teams, Miami is one of, if not the most fascinating teams from a fantasy football standpoint, for a number of different reasons, right? They obviously the turnover there, right? They went from Brian Flores, he wasn't necessarily pass heavy, but he was in the top half of passing attempts in football last year. Now they go to Mike McDaniel, who was, I don't have it in front of me, but I think he was like 26, 27, 28th in passing attempts. And of course, you got to keep roster and all of that stuff in mind. But there's some interesting trend changes there to be aware of for fantasy football players. But then they go and get Tyreek Hill. They remodeled the running back room. That like suddenly Myle Gaskin is 4th on the depth chart. Yeah. So there's a lot. 5th. Maybe even 5th. So there's a lot to dive into. But before we get into the fun part of fantasy football, what everybody wants to know, I think I always like to start these with the part that a lot of fantasy football players don't think about. I know I don't think about it. Some people think about the offensive line, right? There's people out there. You can look at PFF's rankings, and there are resources out there, but I'd say the average fantasy football player doesn't really think about the offensive line at all. So I'd like to ask you, maybe not what do we need to know about the Dolphins offensive line, but is it any good? Do you expect it to be a top unit, a bottom unit? What are you expecting from that O line?
Anything better than last year. Last year, it was the worst offensive line in football, and might have been the worst offensive line in like the last 10 years of football. It was bad last year. Sure. The fact that they won 9 games, the fact that Tua had any type of success behind that offensive line is just an amazement in itself. The offensive line and the run game were ranked in the last. It was horrible.
Sure.
So this year, if they're ranked like 17th, I'd be like, oh my God, that's so good.
Well, like we were talking about, 8-8 sounds, right, from exactly. The last several years.
But bringing in Teron Armstead, bringing in Connor Williams, and you still have Robert Hunt, who is showing to be a very good right guard, is really helping to solidify and try to bring the offensive line up. I'm hearing good things about Liam Eichenberg, Austin Jackson. He's still, trying to get into his all, but the Dolphins realized that they needed the help, and they bring in Applebaum, who had brought Boston College one of the best offensive lines last year in the nation. They bring in the offensive line coach from the Chargers, who took theirs from last to 10th. Bring him in as an offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
So they understand where the Dolphins were at offensive line last year. So as of right now, it's hard to really tell you where the Dolphins are when it comes to, like, today being Tuesday the 2nd, they had their first padded practice. So it's hard to really give you an assessment of where they are. But I'm just hoping anywhere above 32 would be fine for me.
Can't go to 33 for sure, but yeah, and I think it's something that is important to at least think about, especially when you do think about the head coaching change with Mike McDaniel. You have to assume he's going to bring a run heavy approach, and obviously a big part of that is the offensive line. And I know there's two ways to look at the offensive line when, there's the pass protection side, there's the rushing scheme side of things with the offensive line. When you look at the backfield, you look at the running backs in Miami, right? I just mentioned Mike McDaniel, heavy, history shows a heavy rushing attack type of game plan. And that's to be expected coming from the Shanahan tree. What are you expecting from the Dolphins backfield this year? I think most of us are expecting a committee approach, right? Chase Edmonds is usually the first running back off the board for the Dolphins. And that doesn't happen until like the 8th, 9th round currently.
It's not surprising.
Yeah, which it makes sense, right? We're expecting Sony Michel, they brought in Raheem Mostert, who comes with Mike McDaniel from San Francisco, and they still have the incumbent, Myle Gaskin in there. Just in general, what are you expecting from this Dolphins unit? Are there going to be any surprises? Are you expecting it to go Edmonds, Mostert, Sony? What are you thinking there?
Yeah. I'm thinking your top 3 rotation is Mostert, Edmonds. Well, Edmonds, Mostert, Sony Michel. Might even take Sony Michel, put him second. Okay. When they signed Sony Michel, I was very happy with that signing. I really like the way he's been consistent. Like, he's a consistent producer. Yep. Even with the Patriots, last year he had to split carries, had 800 some yards. Like, he's a consistent producer. So he
eventually took over. He took that starting job from Darrell Henderson last year, which is impressive.
An unsung hero that a lot of people aren't talking about, especially when it comes to that run game, is the addition of Alec Ingold, the fullback.
Yep.
He's going to seriously help with that run game. And like you said, it's Mike McDaniel is bringing in that zone run offense. And Chase Edmonds, he was interviewed, I don't think it was yesterday. I think it was the day before yesterday. And he broke it down. The difference between in Arizona, where they were running an inside zone versus what the Dolphins are running is more an outside zone, and just how smart he is when it comes to understanding the concept and everything. But again, when it comes to the Dolphins, it's hard. They don't have a Derrick Henry. They don't have an Alvin Kamara. They don't have a Cook. They don't have that one guy,
right.
Okay, draft this guy because he's their bell cow. He's going to run it all over the place. So it's hard for me to give you guys the suggestion of saying take Edmonds, take Mostert, take Sony Michel. But if I had to pick one of them, I would probably say, and it's surprising, Sony Michel, because this offense doesn't seem like a home run type of offense. You'll probably get them. You're flipping Tyreek Hill on the team, so you'll get them. But Sony Michel is going to be your red zone scoring running back. So if you were worried about getting 6 points every once in a while or whatever at running back, I'd probably grab Sony Michel late.
See, and that's particularly notable because I haven't looked here in a little bit. I'm pulling up the ADP right now, but Sony Michel is easily the last. I shouldn't say last. Myle Gaskin is the last, but Sony Michel's the 3rd running back drafted usually in fantasy leagues so far. And last I saw, been doing best ball leagues on underdogs and DraftKings. And last I saw, we're talking nearly free, 16th, 17th, 18th round. I think and I have been grabbing him in my fantasy leagues rather frequently. I think he's a great, late round flyer. I've also been mixed in some Raheem Mostert. I got it here. So he goes around pick 180. Overall, which is not good at math. So let's just pull up 15th round. He's free. And that, Mike McDaniel's going to run the ball. That they can make a star out of nothing. But last year he took Elijah Mitchell when it was supposed to be Trey Sermon that emerged, and they took Elijah Mitchell and made him very relevant from a fantasy standpoint. So I think the overall advice that I usually give to my subscribers regarding Miami's backfield is to be open to all of them and kind of sprinkle, mix up that exposure wherever you can. And it sounds like you would agree that all 3 are going to play a part here.
Yeah, definitely. And it's more of a durability thing also when it comes to Mostert and Edmonds, where Sony Michel kind of shows he can be a little bit more durable.
Yeah.
But you'll probably get, if you're in a PPR, then probably stick with the other 2 guys because they're going to be catching the ball out of the backfield.
Right.
Especially Edmonds. Edmonds seems like the number 1. So it makes sense to me why he's the first Dolphin running back taken, especially if you're in a PPR league.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think if anything else, all of them are cheap, right? Like Chase Edmonds in the 9th round or whatever it is, that's super affordable. I think anybody would take RB1 in the 9th. Yeah, 100%. And then Sony Michel as your late round running back that could take over or fill in a pinch or get playing time during bye weeks. I think the one thing we do know with Mike McDaniel coaching that team is that there will be value in the Miami Dolphins backfield. So mix up that exposure and do what you can with it. You mentioned Myle Gaskin possibly being 5th on the depth chart. Who's that 4th one that I'm missing?
Salvon Ahmed.
Oh, okay. He's still in the picture. I didn't even realize it.
Yeah, he was with McDaniel in San Fran before he came to Miami. So there is, but I'm hearing good things about everybody, right? I'm Saquandre White, undrafted free agent. I'm hearing things about him. Jared Dokes, I'm not hearing anything. You guys probably don't even know who he is. Don't even worry about it. He might not even be on the team.
Deep dynasty leaguers know that name, but yeah.
But I'm hearing good things about a lot of these guys, very versatile runners. But the one that I'm hearing the most is Chase Edmonds.
For sure. I think it makes sense. Cool. Let's talk about the air game a little bit. And actually, before we talk about the offensive side of the ball, let's talk real quickly about the defensive side of the ball. A lot of people, that's kind of like the offensive line. I think that's something a lot of people don't think about. Who do we need to, if we're considering using a wide receiver against the Dolphins, who do we need to watch out for? Is Xavier Howard still that guy? And then is there anybody else as far as the, defensive backs, corners, anybody we need to watch out for? And then as a 2-parter to this, or 3-parter to this question, for IDP players, which defensive players on Miami are going to get you stats in fantasy football?
So besides X, because he's just a turnover machine. He's always around the ball. He's always, the Ravens game, forces the fumble, takes it back. He's always around the ball. Trill Williams, you might not know who that is, but Trill Williams during camp has been very, very, very active. Obviously Javon Holland, he's going to be a top 10 safety in the league. And when it comes to a defensive player, like you have Emmanuel Ogbah, who's a big sack guy. We brought in Melvin Ingram, but he's going to be a situational guy.
Sure.
Jaylen Phillips broke the Dolphins rookie sack record, 8.5 last year, and he was taken off the field a lot. So he could be another guy. Tyndall, our first pick in the 3rd round, really fast. And I'm hearing he's being super disruptive.
Okay.
Jerome Baker, if I had to give you anybody, they like to blitz him a lot, and he's very fast in coverage. So I'd probably say if it comes to a defensive player, probably Jerome Baker.
Love it, man. All right, let's talk about the elephant in the room for Miami. Tyreek, Jaylen Waddle. So hopefully I didn't ruffle any feathers here, but in my article, in my podcast and YouTube, I personally talked about being out on both guys in fantasy football, at least at their current cost. Tyreek Hill is currently like a late 2nd round pick. Jaylen Waddle goes towards the back end of the 3rd, early 4th. I detailed out why in the article. We won't get into that right now. That's not what this time is for. But the TLDR in a nutshell, I was thinking, to me, it doesn't seem likely that given Tua's history and given Mike McDaniel's history, that 2 elite wide receivers I don't think that they're going to support 2 fantasy football elite wide receivers. And even if one of them does live up to ADP, that likely means the other one doesn't. What am I wrong there? What are your thoughts, knowing what you know about Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle and how the Dolphins are going to use both guys? What are you thinking for those 2 guys in particular?
It's going to be very interesting, because, like you said, Tyreek is going to get the ball. Tyreek's also going to command double teams, because if you don't put a safety over top, he's going to get loose and Tua is going to throw him the ball. It's going to be. We saw it at camp. We saw him connect on a 65-yard touchdown pass because they didn't put a safety over the top. But on the flip side, you do that, you're leaving Waddle open, and Waddle's been producing in camp. Waddle's actually also been getting handoffs in the backfield at camp. So there's also that little sprinkle in there.
Well, and that gets people excited after watching what Mike McDaniel did with Debo last year. So
exactly.
Yep. Okay.
So it's gonna, but I'm also hearing Hill's also taking snaps in the backfield. So it's Mike McDaniel knows how to use his guys. So it's like I can't tell you like go for one or the other or don't go for, because there might be games where Hill goes off and then Waddle kind of probably has like 65 yards and then Hill has like 150 and then vice versa. It could be a back and forth, or they can go up against a horrible team with no pass defense and all of a sudden Tua is just lighting it up and throwing it to everybody. It's difficult, and when it comes to a fantasy standpoint, it's difficult because it's like, who do you choose? Because one is going to get the distraction, the other one isn't. But when it comes to a Dolphin fan, I'm ecstatic. I love it.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly how I put it in my article, is that like from a real football standpoint, this is great for Miami.
Mm-hmm.
From a fantasy football standpoint, this is
a nightmare.
Really tricky, right? It's like, do you want both? Do you want neither? Do you want one? And if so, which one? So it's going to be interesting. Time will tell. If I forced you to say Tyreek, like if you're on the clock right now and you can choose Tyreek in the second or Jaylen Waddle in the, let's just say late third, you have to pick one. Which one are you picking?
I'd probably take Tyreek.
Okay.
Just because of his speed. I know that him and Waddle are very similar in speed, but Tyreek has the experience. He knows how to get off press coverage and he knows how to use his speed and run his routes and stuff. Whereas Waddle, it's his second year. He's still learning concepts and stuff. So I'd go with Tyreek.
All right. Last one. Where does this leave Mike Gesicki? Right. We know for previous seasons, he was number 2 on the target totem pole, basically. This obviously drops him down to number 3. I'm hearing that he's going to be used as a blocker more than he has in the past. I've come a little bit off of Gesicki in fantasy leagues. What are your thoughts about Mike Gesicki as far as fantasy football goes?
It's going to be interesting because it's the same thing that we talk about with Tua and Waddle. You got to throw Gesicki in there as well, because they bring in Embry, who was the tight end coach for the 49ers. He was also the tight end coach for the Kansas City Chiefs when they had Antonio Gonzalez. So he's worked with very good tight ends and he's molded very good tight ends. And the way Mike McDaniel uses his tight ends and the way he used Kittle and stuff, it's very interesting. So with Hill taking some of the attention and then Waddle potentially taking some of the attention, you have Gesicki underneath. Might be wide open. You're not going to put a linebacker on Gesicki because he's going to out jump him. You try to put a slot corner on him, he's going to be more physical. So it's another interesting scenario where guys are going to take attention. The Dolphins now put themselves in a situation where you can't just focus on one guy. And then that's where we go back to the running backs, because, okay, you shut down Hill, you shut down Waddle, you shut down Gesicki, right? Chase Edmonds out of the backfield, you dump it to him on a screen. The offense just stacked up with weapons to help Tua out, essentially. And it's, when it comes to a fantasy standpoint, you're like trying to like pick who am I going to, whereas a Dolphin fan, you're just sitting back like, do it. Like your fantasy football owners are the opposing defenses trying to pick somebody to have on their team
and being frustrated when they get it wrong.
I'm just sitting there like, good.
Well, speaking of Tua, and we got literally 2.5 minutes before Zoom kicks me off because I forgot to upgrade to Pro. So speaking of Tua, just real quickly, second contract, you think he's the guy?
It all depends. Like we talked about,
this is the year.
It depends on the offensive line, but it depends on how he plays. I've said this and I'll say it 1,000 times. The team making the playoffs doesn't dictate his, staying with the team, because Justin Herbert never made the playoffs and he's shown that he's a franchise quarterback. Tua doesn't need to make the playoffs to show that he's a franchise quarterback. He needs to play like a franchise quarterback. It all depends if the offensive line can give him time. 41% of his passes last year, he had less than 2 seconds to throw the ball. If the offensive line can give him time to throw, and he is allowed to read the defense and go through his progressions, he will be just fine.
All right, man. I love it. This is the year, right? There's no more excuses after this year. Tyreek, It's all in place. All right, man. That's all we have time for today. Literally, before Zoom is like, upgrade, you got to pay us, which is totally fair. I totally get it. But everybody, again, please be sure to follow Doug on Twitter at DouglyDoWrong, and definitely check out his YouTube page. It's awesome. Like I'm not even a Dolphins fan, and I found myself sucked into like 2.5 videos, partially because Doug's actually really funny as well. So very comedic. If you like football, if you like the Dolphins for sure, but if you like football, it's still a very worthy YouTube subscription. So definitely do that. Doug, thanks for hopping on here, man. It was really awesome having you. I appreciate it.
I really, really appreciate it. Hopefully we do this again soon.
So there you have it. Great conversation with Doug from DouglyDoWrong. Please, again, be sure to go to Twitter and give him a follow at DouglyDoWrong on Twitter. Great conversation with Doug. Really appreciate the insights that he shared. In fact, such insights led to me actually bumping Sony Michel up a couple tiers in my fantasy football draft kits, which, by the way, are going to remain $10 throughout the rest of August. And my fantasy football season pass, which is going to include the draft kits, access to our online community, and all 22 lineup setting heat maps this year, that is going to remain $40 for the rest of the month. Stay tuned as more fantasy football team previews and possibly some other surprise episodes come trickling in throughout the next few days, next few weeks. Really appreciate you tuning in. It means more to me than I can ever put into words. Thank you so much for being here. Cheers. This brew's for you.